She tried to have him removed from the flight until he pulled out a badge that shut the entire cabin up. The air inside gate B14 was dry, heavy with the scent of reheated breakfast sandwiches and burnt coffee. People shifted from foot to foot, checking watches, scrolling endlessly on phones, pretending not to look bored. A voice crackled over the intercom. Now boarding group 1 for flight 2176 to Chicago Midway. First-class passengers may proceed to the gate. Out of the cluster stepped Darian Holt, dark blue blazer, white Oxford shirt, clean-shaven with just a hint of 5 o'clock shadow. Not loud, not trying to make a statement, but the kind of man who looked like he was always 2 steps ahead. He carried a leather messenger bag and a paperback novel tucked under his arm. He wasn't in a hurry, just walked with that kind of quiet rhythm that said he'd done this 100 times before. Gate agent smiled, he nodded back. Nothing dramatic, just another business traveler headed to another meeting. Darian gave the interior of the plane a quick glance as he stepped inside. Rows of seats, humming overhead vents, the smell of stale air. Nothing new. He found 2A, window seat, first row, first class. He slid into his seat, buckled in, and cracked open his book. Invisible Man. His lips curved slightly. He'd read it before, more than once, but something about it always kept him coming back. A few minutes later, 2B filled. A woman in her late 40s with a tailored beige coat, shiny gold earrings, and the kind of heels that weren't meant for walking through airports. Whitney Prentice. Her bag was designer, her phone screen had 2 missed calls and a calendar full of Zooms. She sat with practiced grace, then glanced over at Darian. She did a small double take. Darian didn't look up. He turned a page. Whitney shifted in her seat, casually, but not really. Her eyes flicked over him, down to his lap, back to his face, then out the window. Her fingers adjusted her scarf unnecessarily. She crossed her legs, uncrossed them. Her eyes lingered just a second too long on the flight attendant walking down the aisle. Darian felt it. That thing. That little shift in atmosphere when you know someone's looking at you like you're out of place. He didn't flinch, just kept reading. The flight attendant, young guy with buzzed hair and good posture, came by offering pre-flight water. Whitney declined with a tight smile. Darian took a cup, thanked him with a nod. When the attendant walked away, Whitney spoke, almost casual. So, are you going to Chicago for work? Her voice was polite, but something underneath tugged at the tone. Darian lowered his book just a bit. Yep, you? She gave a short, brittle laugh. Kind of. I'm heading to a conference. Healthcare compliance. Thrilling stuff. Her fingers fiddled with her wedding ring. You with a company or government, he said simply. Not rude, not eager to share more. Whitney raised her eyebrows slightly. Ah, I see. It was the kind of response people give when they don't actually see anything, but think they should. She didn't ask another question. He didn't offer any more. The flight attendants were closing the bins now, and the final boarding call was being made. Through the window, Darian could see the tarmac workers waving neon sticks, guiding luggage carts into position. He took a sip of water. Page turned. His mind went quiet, but Whitney kept glancing his way. Not a word more, just glances. And the longer it went on, the more deliberate they started to feel, like she was waiting for something, watching. But before the doors even closed, tension was already beginning to settle between those 2 seats, and it wasn't going to stay there for long. 5 minutes into taxiing, and Whitney was still restless. Darian could hear it, the shallow breaths, the constant adjusting, the way she kept looking around like she was expecting someone to come and change something. He didn't look up, didn't need to. He'd seen this before, in airports, stores, even his own neighborhood. People like her didn't always say it out loud, but you could feel it. A subtle discomfort, a suspicion they didn't quite know how to explain, or admit. Seatbelts clicked around the cabin. Phones went into airplane mode. A baby somewhere in row 12 started to whimper. Darian exhaled slowly, closed the book, and tucked it back into his bag. He figured he'd nap for a bit once they were in the air. He leaned his head against the window, eyes half closed. Then he heard it. Excuse me. Whitney's voice was soft, but sharp, like a teacher correcting you in class. She had flagged the flight attendant, same young guy from earlier. Sorry, I know you're busy, but I think there may be an issue with my seat. The attendant leaned in. Is it broken? No, not exactly. I just... She glanced at Darian, then back, lowering her voice. I'm feeling a little, uncomfortable. Could I possibly switch seats? Maybe after takeoff? The attendant looked puzzled. I can check, but I think we're pretty full today. Can I ask what the issue is? Whitney hesitated. Her eyes darted to Darian again. He hadn't moved. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. That was it. Something didn't feel right. The flight attendant blinked. What do you mean? Whitney leaned in a little closer, voice barely above a whisper now. I don't want to cause a scene or anything, but I'd feel safer if I wasn't sitting here. It was quiet, but Darian caught enough of it. He opened his eyes, slowly, turned his head, looked directly at her. Is there something you want to ask me? He said calmly. Whitney blinked. She wasn't expecting that. Oh no, not at all. You're feeling unsafe? He said, voice steady. I never said that, she replied too quickly. Yes, you did. The attendant stood awkwardly between them now, unsure of what to do. He looked at Darian, then back at Whitney. Darian leaned back in his seat. If you want to ask me something, ask it. Don't dance around it. Whitney flushed red. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I have instincts, you know? A gut feeling. Ah, Darian said. The gut. The tension was climbing now, fast and hot. Other passengers in first class had started to tune in, heads turning slightly, ears perked. People could sense it, even if they didn't yet know what it was. The flight attendant cleared his throat. I'll go speak with the lead and see what we can do. He walked off. Darian turned back to the window. Funny how your instincts only get triggered when someone looks like me. Whitney didn't answer. Her fingers were tight around her phone now, her lips pressed thin. For a moment, no one said anything. Just the rumble of the plane preparing for takeoff. But then, Whitney picked up her phone and started typing, furiously, thumb tapping fast. Darian glanced sideways. He didn't need to see the screen to know she was writing something meant to document this moment. She was trying to turn suspicion into justification. He sighed, not because he was surprised, but because it was tiring, always tiring. But the wheels hadn't even left the ground yet, and the situation was already threatening to go way beyond uncomfortable. 15 minutes later, the plane was in the air, cruising smoothly above the clouds, but the cabin felt like it was sitting on broken glass. Whitney hadn't looked Darian's way since the moment he called her out. Her body was angled away from him, like that would erase everything that had already happened. Her lips hadn't moved, but her fingers hadn't stopped. She'd been texting, opening and closing her screen, muttering softly under her breath like she was trying to convince herself she was doing the right thing. Then a flight attendant returned, this time a different one, older, more experienced. A woman with sharp eyes and a clipped tone. She stopped beside Whitney's seat. Miss Prentice? She asked quietly. Whitney nodded quickly as if this moment had been eagerly awaited. I understand you have a concern? Whitney lowered her voice again, but not enough to keep Darian from hearing. Yes, I didn't want to cause any issues, but I just really feel like the man sitting next to me, he's acting odd. He's watching me. He made me feel very threatened earlier. Darian turned to face them both. His voice was calm but direct. She means me. The flight attendant glanced at him, then back at Whitney. Did he say anything threatening? Whitney's lips parted, but she hesitated. Not exactly, but it was his tone and his body language. I don't know. I just got a really bad vibe. Darian let out a breath through his nose, short, tired. What I actually said, he cut in, was, if you have something to ask me, ask it. That's the threatening part, apparently. I didn't say you were dangerous, Whitney snapped, suddenly defensive. I just said you made me feel unsafe. The attendant held up a hand, trying to keep things steady. All right, let me speak with my supervisor. She walked off without another word. Whitney turned sharply toward Darian. You didn't have to be so aggressive. Wasn't, he replied flatly. You just didn't like being challenged. She looked stunned, like the word had hit her harder than she expected. But it wasn't about the volume. It was the truth that shook her. Then, just minutes later, the supervisor arrived. Tall, serious, polite, but formal. The kind of guy who probably got flown in for incidents like this. He crouched slightly by their row, Sir, ma'am, my name's Raymond. I understand there's a concern. Whitney jumped in fast. Yes, I just feel very uncomfortable. I asked to be reseated and no one's doing anything about it. I don't understand why I'm being ignored when I'm clearly not the problem. Raymond nodded slowly, professionally. I hear you, and I'm here now to understand the full picture. He turned to Darian. Sir, is there anything you'd like to share from your perspective? Darian looked him in the eye. She doesn't like that I'm sitting here. That's it. Raymond's eyes scanned them both. Has there been any exchange? Words? Threats? No threats, Darian said. She asked to move because she didn't like my energy. She called it a gut feeling. Whitney looked horrified now because the words were being repeated out loud by someone else, and they sounded exactly as bad as they were. She said I was watching her. I've been reading a book, Darian continued. She tried to make me into a problem, and now she's looking for someone to fix it. Raymond stood up straight again. He didn't say anything immediately. Sir, if I could just ask, he said gently, may I see your ID? There it was, the line drawn in the sky. Darian didn't hesitate. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a black leather badge holder, flipped it open. Gold badge, federal ID, clean and clear. I'm Special Agent Darian Holt, Department of Justice. The reaction was instant. Whitney's face dropped. Not in fear, no. This wasn't about danger. It was shame, embarrassment. But too late. The supervisor looked startled. His tone shifted slightly. Thank you for that, sir. I appreciate your cooperation. Whitney's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but nothing came out. But the damage had already been done, and silence wasn't going to undo it. The silence in first class was sharp enough to slice through steel, the kind of silence that only shows up after everyone's heard too much. Whitney sat stiff in her seat, staring straight ahead, hands frozen on her lap. Her face had gone pale, her jaw tight. She couldn't bring herself to look at Darian, not after that badge, not after the title. Special Agent. It echoed in her ears like a courtroom gavel. Darian sat the same way he had the whole flight. Calm, collected, still. But the look in his eyes had changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. That heavy kind of disappointment that comes when you realize you've been here before and you're going to be here again. Raymond, the supervisor, had walked off without saying much else. What could he say? He'd seen it happen enough times to know that no policy could fix what this was really about. The rest of the cabin was quiet too. Eyes were darting. Some people tried to pretend they weren't listening. Others didn't even bother. Everyone had a front row seat to the moment Whitney Prentice had been caught accusing a federal agent of being suspicious. Because he looked like someone she didn't expect to be sitting next to her. Darian turned his head slightly. His voice didn't rise. You know what bothers me the most? Whitney blinked. She didn't answer. Couldn't. You didn't ask me anything, he continued. Not who I was, not why I was here. You looked at me for 5 seconds and decided I was a threat. I didn't, she started. You did, he said, cutting her off, still calm. You didn't ask. You assumed. You let your fear speak for you. And now I'm the one that had to pull out a badge just to sit in peace. Whitney finally turned to him. Her face was tight with something between defensiveness and shame. You don't know what it's like to be a woman traveling alone. He gave her a look, not cruel, not mocking, just real. No, he said. I know what it's like to be a black man in America. That stopped her. For a second, it looked like she wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. She looked away again, toward the aisle, nowhere to run at 35,000 feet. I didn't mean anything by it, she said finally, weakly. You meant everything by it, he said. That's the point. Another silence. But this one was different. He wasn't going to fill it for her. She had to sit in it. A few rows back, someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat, but no one spoke. Darian turned his head back toward the window. You think pulling that badge made me feel better? He said, almost to himself now. It didn't. It made me feel tired. Whitney stared at her hands. I'm sorry, she said, barely audible. He didn't look at her. Are you sorry for what you did, or sorry you were wrong? Her mouth opened again, but she couldn't answer. She didn't know how. The flight kept moving, so did time, but the cabin didn't feel the same anymore. The truth had been laid out in plain sight, and there was no putting it back. But even with the apology hanging in the air, Darian knew the real change wasn't going to happen at 30,000 feet. It had to happen when the wheels hit the ground. It didn't matter that Darian hadn't raised his voice. It didn't matter that he hadn't moved aggressively or made a single threat. The badge only confirmed what he already knew. The rules had changed the moment he sat down. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The crew had started beverage service like nothing had happened. Business as usual. As if the air hadn't just been pulled out of the room 10 minutes ago. A flight attendant, one who hadn't been involved earlier, came by with the cart. She stopped at Darian's row, her eyes scanning quickly between the two passengers. "Something to drink, sir?" He looked up. "Just water, thanks." She handed him a bottle, her hand steady, her smile brief but genuine. Then she turned to Whitney. Whitney declined with a slight wave, eyes down, voice clipped. "I'm fine." The cart rolled away. The hum of the engines was the only thing that filled the space between them now. Darian twisted the cap off the bottle and took a sip. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He'd already said what mattered, but that didn't mean he wasn't thinking. Every minute that passed felt heavier than it should have. Because this wasn't about a seat on a plane, it was about the silent accusation, the unchecked suspicion, the assumption that a black man in first class needed explaining. He'd earned his seat, just like he earned his badge. The long nights, the training, the years of discipline. But in one moment, all of it got reduced to a question of whether he looked right to the person sitting beside him. Whitney sat frozen. Her phone was in her hand, screen black. She hadn't touched it since he flashed the badge. Whatever story she'd been crafting earlier didn't feel so clean now. Then she spoke again, quietly, almost like she was talking to herself. "I didn't know." Darian turned slightly. "Didn't know what?" "That you were with the government. That you were—" He cut her off. "That I wasn't a threat?" Her face crumpled, just slightly. "I guess. That's the problem," he said. "You needed a title, a badge, authority, just to accept that I was allowed to sit here in peace." She looked down. "I've never thought of myself as someone who—" "But you are," he said calmly. "You did it without thinking. That's how deep it runs." She didn't respond. "I've seen this play out in worse ways," he added. "In neighborhoods, in traffic stops. Sometimes it doesn't end with a conversation. Sometimes it ends with someone on the ground." Whitney swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to go like that." "I know," he said, "but it did." He leaned back in his seat, resting his head again. He didn't want to keep talking. The lesson had been written clearly enough. Across the aisle, a man in a hoodie gave Darian a small nod. Nothing exaggerated, just one of those quiet, knowing acknowledgments. Darian nodded back. The message had landed. Maybe not with everyone, but someone saw it. Someone understood. And Whitney? She was sitting with a truth that didn't come easy. The kind of truth that shifts the way you see yourself when the mirror finally stops lying. But the end of the flight was coming, and what they'd all do when the wheels touched down would matter far more than anything said in the sky. When the wheels hit the tarmac in Milwaukee, the cabin gave a collective sigh. You could feel the release in people's shoulders, the mental shift as tray tables were stowed and phones came alive. But in row 2, nothing had eased. Not really. Whitney didn't speak again. She didn't try to make small talk, didn't reach for her phone. Her eyes stayed on the seat back in front of her, like she was watching her thoughts scroll by. Every few seconds, she'd inhale like she wanted to say something, but no words followed. Darian, meanwhile, had already powered off. Not his phone. His energy. He'd said what needed to be said. The badge, the explanation, the weight. It was all on the table. The rest wasn't his to carry. Not anymore. As the plane taxied to the gate, the flight attendant who'd handled the first part of the incident walked by. He slowed near Darian's row, gave a small nod. Not the forced kind. Not one of those corporate apologies wrapped in smiles. Just a quiet, respectful gesture. Darian nodded back. That was enough. When the seatbelt sign went off, everyone sprang up like it was a race. Bags came down, coats rustled, row by row, people moved toward the exit. Darian stayed seated. No rush. Whitney didn't move either. She looked at him finally. Really looked at him. Not as a threat, not as a problem, just as a man. I'm sorry, she said again. This time, not out of reflex. Her voice cracked slightly. Not just because you're with the DOJ. Because I was wrong. And I saw it too late. He met her gaze, steady. You saw it. That's a start. She blinked fast. I think I've gone my whole life, never thinking I was the kind of person who would do something like that. A lot of people do, he said, until they do it. The line moved forward. A few passengers glanced their way again, some with pity, some with guilt, some with quiet recognition, but no one said a word. Whitney stood, stepped into the aisle. She paused, turned back. I'm going to remember this, she said. Darian gave a small nod. Make it count. She left without another word. When Darian finally stood, he slung his bag over his shoulder, moved through the aisle like any other passenger. But he knew eyes were on him. They always were. He didn't walk faster, didn't smile, just moved forward. In the terminal, a young black teenager was waiting near the arrivals board. His hoodie had a small logo from a local community college. As Darian passed by, the teen gave him a curious look, then spotted the badge on his hip, still clipped discreetly. His eyes lit up. You FBI? He asked, wide-eyed. Darian smiled faintly. Close enough. The teen grinned. That's dope. Darian gave him a nod. Stay sharp. You'll get there. The teen beamed. Bet. And just like that, he kept walking. The lesson? It wasn't about the badge. It never was. The badge just gave Darian credibility in a world that should have already seen him as human. It shouldn't take a title or a suit or a gold emblem to be treated with basic respect. It shouldn't take a confrontation to remind people of the truth. Not everyone who makes you uncomfortable is a threat. And not every gut feeling is worth trusting, especially when it's built on bias. So the next time your instinct whispers a story, take a second and ask yourself who wrote it. Because the first step to change is realizing the problem isn't always out there. It's sometimes sitting quietly inside you. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it made you think, reflect, or pause, share it. Let someone else sit with it too. And if you've ever been Darian, you're not alone. We see you, we hear you, you matter.